Imagine this. You're an early human roasting meat over an open fire. Nothing unusual. People had been doing this for a very long time already. But this time, you notice something. As the meat cooks, fat starts rendering out of it, dripping down onto the hot stones or coals beneath. And where that dripping fat lands, something changes. The surface it touches browns faster, crisps differently, smells noticeably better than the parts of the meat not sitting in that dripping fat. You'd think oil, something so central to cooking today that entire cuisines revolve around it, was invented specifically for the kitchen. It wasn't. For a huge stretch of early human history, and later of recorded civilization, oil's biggest jobs had almost nothing to do with food. It lit lamps after dark. It anointed bodies in religious ceremonies. It was rubbed onto skin, used in early medicine, even used as a kind of primitive currency in some ancient economies. Cooking with it deliberately on purpose came surprisingly late to the list of things oil was actually for. So if oil wasn't invented for your kitchen, how did it end up there at all? The honest answer starts with something nobody planned. It starts with fat, rendering out of meat by accident, and somebody noticing that the result tasted better than plain roasted meat ever did. That noticing moment, fat dripping, browning, and clearly improving the food it touched, is very likely the actual origin point of cooking with oil at all. Not a deliberate invention. An accident, repeated often enough near enough campfires for someone to eventually connect the dots on purpose. Once early humans noticed that rendered fat improved food, the next step in hindsight feels obvious. But getting there took real trial and error. The earliest deliberate use of fat in cooking almost certainly came from animals, not plants, rendering fat, deliberately melting it down from meat scraps or fatty cuts, rather than waiting for it to accidentally drip during roasting, meant you could now save it, store it, and use it whenever you wanted, not just whenever meat happened to be cooking over a fire. This alone was a genuine leap. Rendered animal fat could be used to fry foods that weren't meat at all. Vegetables, grains, whatever was available, all suddenly cooked differently and often tasted noticeably better. Once fat was deliberately involved, instead of relying on water or dry heat alone. Around the same broad era, in different parts of the ancient world, a completely separate discovery was unfolding. People were pressing oil out of plants, olives in the Mediterranean, sesame seeds across parts of the Middle East and Asia. But here's the detail worth sitting with. These early pressed oils weren't primarily made with cooking in mind at all. Olive oil's earliest widespread uses were for lighting lamps, for religious anointing, and for skincare, treating and softening skin in dry climates. Archaeological evidence for olive oil production dates back thousands of years, well before it became a dominant cooking ingredient the way we think of it today. The oil itself existed and was being deliberately produced at real scale, long before most people were regularly cooking with it. So you had two separate threads developing at once. Animal fat already proven through accident and repetition to genuinely improve cooked food, and plant oils, already being pressed and produced at scale, but mostly for light, ritual and skin, not for the cooking pot. Eventually these threads crossed. If rendered animal fat clearly improved food when used to fry or cook, curiosity or simple availability eventually pushed people to try the same thing with plant oils they already had plenty of sitting around for other purposes. And it worked, arguably even better in many cases, since plant oils could often be produced in far larger, more reliable quantities than animal fat ever could. But understanding why oil actually improved food this dramatically, why it wasn't just a texture preference, required stumbling onto something ancient humans had absolutely no scientific framework to understand yet. A basic difference in how heat itself behaves depending on what you're cooking with. Here's a fact that sounds almost too simple to explain something so significant, but it does. Water, no matter how hard you boil it, cannot get hotter than its boiling point. At standard conditions, that ceiling sits at right around 100 degrees Celsius. Push all the energy you want into a pot of boiling water, and the water itself will not exceed that temperature. It just boils away faster. Oil has no such ceiling, not anywhere close to that. Cooking oil can comfortably reach temperatures well over 150, even 200 degrees Celsius, without boiling away the way water does. That temperature gap is the entire secret behind why oil-cooked food tastes so dramatically different from boiled or steamed food. At those higher temperatures only reachable through fat or oil, a specific chemical process kicks in, now known as the Maillard reaction. where proteins and sugars on a food surface transform, browning, crisping, and producing entirely new flavor compounds that simply cannot form at water's low capped temperature. Ancient humans obviously had no concept of the Maillard reaction, no understanding of proteins or chemical bonds. But they didn't need the science to notice the result. Meat and vegetables cooked in fat or oil consistently browned, crisped, and tasted noticeably richer than anything boiled in water ever could. They were experiencing real dramatic chemistry purely through taste and repetition, discovering by pure trial and error that fat let food reach a place water simply couldn't take it. Once that pattern became obvious enough to notice consistently, oil stopped being just a lamp fuel or a ritual substance on the side. It became something worth deliberately pursuing for the cooking pot itself, eventually becoming one of the most widely used ingredients in human history, purely because someone, somewhere, kept noticing that food touched by fat simply tasted better. But let's be honest about what came with this discovery. Cooking with hot fat and oil, especially over open, uncontrolled flame, was genuinely dangerous in ways ancient cooks had no real way to guard against. Hot fat and oil catch fire far more easily than water ever could, and once ignited, a fat fire behaves violently, flaring and spreading in ways that would have been terrifying and often injurious around an open hearth with no modern safety equipment nearby. Rendering fat itself was also unpleasant, often smoky, physically demanding work, requiring careful attention over sustained heat to avoid burning it, wasting it, or injuring the person doing the rendering. And once oil or fat went rancid, spoiled through age or improper storage, eating it could cause real illness, with no scientific understanding yet of why certain batches made people sick while others didn't. Every early meal fried or cooked in fat, simple and unremarkable as it sounds today, came from real risk, taken by people working entirely through instinct and repeated experience, refining a genuinely dangerous process purely by trial, error, and the occasional burn. So how did early humans stumble onto cooking with oil? Fat dripped from meat roasting over a fire, browned the ground it touched, and tasted better than anything cooked without it. Nobody set out looking for a superior cooking method. Someone simply noticed, and refused to ignore what they'd noticed. That's the same thread running through every one of these stories now. A rock bleeding copper in a campfire, a spring catching fire above buried oil, rotting fruit that animals couldn't resist, rags and fishing nets pulped into something worth writing on. And now, fat dripping off meat, quietly revealing a chemical trick fire itself had been hiding the entire time. None of these discoveries came from genius insight arriving out of nowhere. They came from paying close attention to something ordinary and being curious enough to ask why it happened and whether it could happen again on purpose. There's more of that same curiosity still worth chasing. Whenever the next question finds its moment, we'll be right back here to answer it. If this is the kind of question you didn't know you needed answered, you know what to do.